Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Anthony Peake Consciousness Hour. Today's guest is somebody I've been keen to speak to for quite a long time. The reason being that in my previous book, The Hidden Universe, I had a section on people encountering what we could call the little people, the fae, various things, goblins, these kind of things. And I came across a fascinating website, Canadian website, based in Toronto, that was describing people logged their experiences seeing entities. And I found it a wonderful, wonderful resource. In fact, in the end, I only used one of the examples, but I could have used many more. And what I did was I contacted the lady who was responsible for this, a lady called Susan Demeter. And I was really intrigued by her work, and I was delighted recently when she agreed to be a guest on this podcast. So Susan is waiting for us at the moment over there in Italy. Very exotic, Canadian lady living in Italy, really, really different world. But I'm just going to tell you a little bit about Susan, and then we'll get into chatting generally with her. Okay, Susan Demeter is a Canadian-born scholar, author, artist, and witch. The themes of her writing, research, art and spirituality incorporate her lifelong interest in exceptional human experiences. UFOs, nature, social history, mysteries and cosmic magic. Susan has conducted scholarly research on behalf of the Defence Studies Department of the Canadian Armed Force College in Toronto, Canada, on the topic of UFOs, and for the Koestler Parapsychology Unit at the University of Edinburgh in Scotland regarding poltergeist activity. Susan's writing and research have been featured in a number of publications, and she's a contributing essayist to Robbie Graham's groundbreaking UFOs Reframing the Debate. Susan's essay explores the subject of UFOs through the lens of parapsychology. Susan has actively investigated spook-lights in both Canada and her adopted home Italy, including in field work as an independent boots-on-the-ground UFO researcher. Over the last 2 decades, her approach to the UFO subject has evolved from nuts and bolts to more exotic and right-brained thinking. In 2015, she collaborated on I See Words, I Hear Voices, a major art exhibit at the Power Plant Contemporary Art Gallery in Toronto on the themes of exceptional human experiences, anomalies and marginalisation. Susan's first book, Cosmic Witch, was published in both English and Italian in August 2020. Susan's conducted a series of experiments based on and inspired by the works of the late mathematician Dr. A.R.G. Owen and the psychotherapist Dr. Joel Witten, popularly known as the Philip experiments, which will be the focus of her second book, Cosmic Witch Volume 2, Conjuring UFOs, Social Psi and Magic, which will be available in 2022. Susan lives in the Apennine Mountains near Bologna, Italy, with her husband, astrophysicist and electronic musician Massimo Tedoriani, and their 2 cats, Pixie and Mary. Her home studio faces a mountain peak that was in ancient times considered to be a holy place by both pagans and early Christians, and it is there that the ultra-terrestrials inspire her witchcraft and her art. Susan also writes under the nom-de-plume of Susan Demeter St. Clair. You can read more about the author online at susandemeter.com. That is a simply phenomenal life story. I don't even know where to start with it, really. So maybe just, hi, Susan. Wonderful to have you on the show.
Oh, hi, thank you. I'm honored that you would ask me to be on the show. I'm a big fan of your work, too.
Oh, wonderful, wonderful.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
I know that we recently had a chat discussing our mutual interest in the Philip experiment as well. And with your work, just very quickly as an aside, your work on UFOs and things, do you work with Eric Awile?
Oh, yes, Eric. We work together on several projects and for the Canadian Defence Studies Department of the Canadian Armed Forces College in Toronto. And I helped with the research and editing of his book, Illuminations, which I highly, highly recommend for anybody that's interested in the topic of UFOs and maybe is looking for something a little bit more than the classic interpretation of extraterrestrials visiting Earth, or the null hypothesis, which is what the skeptical type people like to put out there, that, you know, either it's extraterrestrials or nothing. Eric explores UFOs from a completely different and very interesting to me parapsychological way, that I think a lot of your listeners would be very fascinated in. So if they can get the book Illuminations, definitely. Yeah, and I'm very proud to have helped with the research on that.
Well, I'd strongly advise people to do that. You may know that Eric was a previous guest on this show about 3 years ago, and I found his book Illuminations absolutely extraordinary. He is taking a very radically different approach to the UFO phenomenon, and one that I'm taking myself in terms of my egregorial hypothesis. So we share an awful lot here. So I'm delighted to know that you were also involved there. Great deal of synergy between the stuff I'm doing and what you're doing generally. So there's the Eric link, there's the link with the Philip experiment and various other things. And we'll come back to them in a second. But for the moment, let's just focus in on your latest work. So what prompted you to write The Cosmic Witch?
Well, the Cosmic Witch, actually, the book was a surprise to me, because I knew that I was going to write a book, but I had always assumed that the book would be more of a UFO book, somewhat similar to what Eric wrote in Illuminations. It would be a book simply about UFOs, and not necessarily about witchcraft and my involvement as being a witch. But through a series of synchronicities, after I moved here to Bologna, I met with my publisher, and I was talking a bit about my life and being a witch, and he was so fascinated with that, you know, he said, you know, why I would like to publish a book on witchcraft, and would you consider writing it? So that's how Cosmic Witch came about. It's a semi-autobiographical, it's historical. I touch upon historical witches, not necessarily ones that would be more familiar to North American audiences. I concern myself more with European historical witches, and I talk about the various types of witchcraft. There's many different types of witches out there. I am particularly, I am a solitary witch. And my witchcraft is informed by my own experiences with what I consider the UFO phenomena, and from a very early age. So my magical thinking, my spirituality is all tied into these early formative experiences with what I now feel is the UFO phenomena, whatever that may truly be. I, like Eric, don't necessarily subscribe to ETH, or, I mean, it could be that, I don't know, but to me, that's not a satisfying answer to what's really going on here. So that's where Cosmic Witch as a book is. It's a reference book for people that are interested in witchcraft and magic. I discuss what I feel that magic is. The scientific side of that. I discuss a little bit about scientists that have been inspired by the UFO phenomena and magic. I have chapters on that, and basically, I'm getting really good feedback on it. It's different from an occult point of view, or from what people might assume a witch is, but I'm also getting a lot of really good feedback from the community, both in the paranormal community and in the witchcraft community. So I'm very happy and proud of this book.
Can you tell me a little bit? I'm quite intrigued here. What it is about Ontario? I presume your early experiences that you mentioned that were kind of an overlap between psi experiences, poltergeists, UFOs. Can you tell me a little bit about the experiences you had while you were there, and whereabouts? Was this in Toronto itself, or out in the countryside, or where?
This was in the suburban areas surrounding Toronto. I grew up near the lake and Lake Ontario. All the Great Lakes actually have a rich historical background in all sorts of strange anomalies and phenomena. And so it was there in my early years that I encountered as a child what as a child I thought were ghosts, because that was, I guess, the only thing I could pull from my knowledge bank is, oh, I must be experiencing ghosts. They were scary, but they were little homunculus-like beings that often would frighten me. And I created, well, I didn't know at the time, but there was a protector that would come around me that was a wolf, that would speak to me in a telepathic way and would guard me while I was going to bed at night. And then later, as a late teenager and early adult, I came to the conclusions that I must have created the wolf as myself. The wolf was actually me. I was protecting myself from these strange little beings that could be considered goblins, but when I was younger, I thought they were ghosts. And then all of this sort of stopped as when I was a teenager. And then when I was 23, I had my first experience with another adult person with what was a light in the sky, a large glowing red orb over a nuclear power installation. And it was at that time, and what I describe in Cosmic Witch as an initiation, what I view as an initiatory experience, it was at that time I couldn't really deny that I was seeing something very strange, and I started from there researching these subjects, and that basically was what sort of informed the rest of my life. These experiences that I couldn't explain, and then when I started researching and talking to other people and realizing other people were having similar experiences, it snowballed from there.
Right. I'm really intrigued in drilling into this, the entities. Again, remind me, how old were you when you first encountered what you call the goblins? How old were you?
I would say before say kindergarten age, when I was younger, I would have experiences, but they were very dreamlike, or I could write them off to saying that they were imaginary friends, but they were strange. But I would say at about 6, 7 years old is when I first saw what was I would describe as a little man that I knew I was consciously awake, and that it was not something I should be seeing or experiencing. And I do describe that in depth in the Cosmic Witch book, because it was very startling and then frightening for me. And then from there, I would see these beings again, sometimes even in my bed at night. And that was quite frightening. And they appeared to me as very solid. They looked like they were physically there, like they were breaking light, like there was physicality to them. And they were quite frightening.
Did they communicate with you at the time?
Not really. They weren't communicating with me in the sense that I would say they were passing off information, other than I knew that by their facial expressions and things, they were not, they were not necessarily always friendly, like they would frighten me. I did have another experience, like I said before, I was younger, and this one is more dreamlike. And in that case, there was seeming communication, but it was telepathic, and it was a language, I would say, that was maybe gibberish or something made up, but it made sense to me as a little kid. So that was where these experiences stood. And honestly, when I was a teenager and a young adult, I was willing to write all of them off as to, oh, maybe I was imagining. I'm a very imaginative, creative person. So maybe it was all this, until I started having experiences as an adult with first the huge ball of light over the nuclear power station. Then later on, I had an experience with what I can only describe looked like a spaceship, even though I doubt that it actually was a spaceship. To me, it looked like a solid spaceship. And again, this was with another person. So I couldn't deny the experience was happening, whatever it was. And that made me rethink all of these experiences that I was having as a child. and thinking about the reality of them and, you know, what was going on with that. So I think my entire life has been, there's been this theme, underscored theme of UFOs and high strangeness.
It's very much this case, isn't it? That it seems that there is this continuum of UFO activity, poltergeist activity, encounters with the hidden people, and there seems to be a standard theme going on here. And I'm very much fascinated by the linkage between your experiences and something called Charles Bonnet syndrome, and also what is known as quasi-corporal companions. The idea that children there seems to be something to do neurologically with the structure of a young child's brain, whereby either the myelination is not quite functioning in terms of the neurons, or else the communication between the hemispheres of the brain is broken or is open too much, in which case the entities seem to be able to come through. They seem to manifest themselves within this world using our anticipations of them. And I know this is something that Eric talks about. It's something I write about as well. And to me, it's extremely intriguing, because we do have this issue, don't we? That we have the problem of the European approach to UFOs, which is very psychological. It's very much the Jacques Vallée approach of the idea of they have been with us all the time, you know, his passport to Magonia idea. But then we have the nuts and bolts idea, which you touched upon in America, whereby, you know, they're extraterrestrials that are traveling across the vast distances of space in physical machines. Now, what do you think is going on here? Because you obviously saw something in three-dimensional space that seemed to be some kind of a machine. So what's your opinion on that?
On what on seeing the machine?
Yeah, what is really going on?
For me, I think it was very personal at that point. It was whatever this is pulling me back into. I should explain that when my children got a little bit older and I had a little more free time and I was able to get online, because when I had my first experience, it was pre-internet, it was 1990. And so I was very limited in how I could research or the materials I could get a hold of in regards to UFO stuff. And then in the late 1990s, I was able to get online, and I found MUFON and other UFO groups, and I got to a point where I was very dissatisfied with them, and because of my dissatisfaction, I started trying not to think about the whole thing. I was becoming very skeptical to my own experiences, so I joined a skeptical organization. And that's where I kind of was at when I had this second big encounter. I was self-doubting. I was thinking, well, maybe something was wrong with me. Maybe, I don't know. And then all of a sudden that happened. And then I couldn't have any intellectual honesty with myself or with the skeptics if I would have stayed along that tact after I had this experience. So I think for me, it was very symbolic. It was symbolic to say, hey, there is something more here. You're pushing this away and you're ignoring this, and we're not going to let you, whatever we are. This is how I interpreted it at the time. And then I started really thinking about why I saw a spaceship and why the ETH was seemingly important to me at the time. And I realized that it was tied in probably with my own desires of space travel. I was a huge fan of Doctor Who. I was a huge fan of Star Trek and Star Wars. And I was a baby during the moon landings. And I had a father that was so enthusiastic about all of these things. And I just realized I wanted it to be ET. I want to have a cosmos filled with all sorts of different beings and go space traveling and things. And when I realized that was probably tied into my own desires is when I started reorienting my thinking a little bit and saying, hey, wait a second, maybe it is ET, but I can't deny the fact that I really want it to be, and maybe I'm missing a whole bigger picture that's going on. So it was at that point that I really started reading Jacques Vallée and different Hilary Evans, his book and his ideas, and my whole thinking started going in a different direction after that.
Yeah, because Hilary Evans, his books again were a great influence upon me, and of course the great John Keel. And all of these writers are very much moving away from the extraterrestrial hypothesis to the intraterrestrial hypothesis in many ways. And of course, this seems to be evidential throughout history. You know, I'm always intrigued as to the way in which these entities seem to culture track, the way in which they seem to always manifest themselves in the way that we are going to be able to understand what they're doing. And it seems that their relationship with us is far, far closer than we're ever likely to really understand fully. So in terms of this, what I was delighted was your news, because like myself, I mean, I used to take the Skeptic magazine in the UK. I was a member of the Rationalist Association. I've always taken my first point to be rational about these things. These are extraordinary experiences, but can they be explained in other ways? And rather like yourself, I've just seen the evidence that has moved me away from pure skepticism to saying, come on, guys, there's more to this than meets the eye. It's far more exciting and far more interesting if we start looking at the science of this. In which case, that brings me to my next question, which has always intrigued me with people who are interested in the overlap of witchcraft and science. And we had Serena Roney Dougal on this show a few years ago, and I don't know if you've come across Serena's work. And really, really interesting, the idea of how people are moving towards that as well. So in terms of the overlap between witchcraft and science, where do you think they meet? How do they meet? And what can this tell us about reality?
Okay, well, witchcraft for me is based in magic. And magic for me is definitely related to psi. It is psi. It is the ability to use different means, whether it's spell work or ritual work, to game reality, so to speak, to shift reality and to bend it a little bit to our will so that we can get an outcome that we're wanting. And this to me is all related to psi. So psi being psychic abilities, whether it's psychokinesis or whether it's extrasensory perception. This is all tied into it. So I feel that not only is my witchcraft, which is tied into pagan belief, so it's very tied into the physical earth and the elements of earth and the elements of the cosmos, which are physical. So this, you know, this can be studied by physics, but the magic itself, there's already a lot of really good science that have been done by people such as Dean Radin and the ions and scientific parapsychology. So there is a physicality, and just as there is a physicality to UFOs and poltergeist experiences and all of these things, I feel that there is a physicality as well to magic, and that this can be explained by psi. So that's where I'm at, and I do have a chapter devoted to that in the Cosmic Witch book, where I explain more my views on synchronicity, on magic, and how it's not. I mean, people think of witchcraft and they think of magic and they think of magical thinking as being completely away from science, and I'm saying that's not necessarily true, because there is a physicality that is linked to this. I believe in a physical universe, that there is a physicality to it. I just think that there's a lot more than just that as well. But that's pretty much my thinking on it. And then true with the early witches, as I discuss in the historical section of the book, and I specifically talk about one witch, Gentile Budroli, who was living in Bologna in the 14th century, and she was an astrologer, an alchemist, and all of these pursuits led into what we know as modern sciences, as you know, astrology morphed into astronomy, and you know, alchemy into chemistry. So I do think that that there is not necessarily this strong separation as people might think.
What about the link then between magic and UFOs?
Oh, well, magic and UFOs, I mean, that's the basis of my own experimentation. And what really led me into labeling myself and self-identifying as the cosmic witch, because I have been doing experimentation in trying to create a UFO experience, much like the Conjuring Philip experiments. I've been doing similar experiments in trying to create UFOs and seeing if we can attract them or create them in different various spaces, and see if witnesses will come back to us with.
I'm keen to come back to the Philip experiment later. So focusing in, what's the process that you've been using here? Because I'm really intrigued about this link and your experiments. And can you tell us a little bit about the protocols of your experiments that you've been doing in terms of the UFO and magic links?
Well, there's different methodologies, and therefore there's different protocols depending upon if it's something that I'm doing myself. If it's, sometimes I will do a ritual that's very spontaneous, depending upon if I feel like I'm in that UFO zone, which can be very difficult to describe to people unless they've been there. But because I've had so many of these experiences with high strangeness, there's a point where I know I have a feeling within my mind and body that something could happen. So I will do something very spontaneous and ritualistic in hopes of creating an experiment or an experience. And sometimes I have had success with that. Other times I have done things such as creative writing exercises with others, where we talk about UFOs and we write a fictional account, and see what that will produce. Other experiments I've done have been with others in doing trance meditation, or RV type stuff like remote viewing, to try and again provoke or create a UFO experience. So those will be detailed far more, like I touch on them in Cosmic Witch, but I will detail them in far greater detail in the second book. So
thanks for that. Sarah, do you have any comments or any questions you'd like to ask at this stage?
Yeah, I've just been taking notes of the things you've been talking about. So there were a few things that I found really interesting, or that kind of cropped up for me. I was thinking about when you were talking about the little people and seeing goblins, and it reminded me of Mark J. Plotkin, an ethnobotanist, wrote Tales of a Shaman's Apprentice, and he worked with different tribes in the Amazon. And there was one tribe that all explained seeing these small little dark people in the forest, and all of them saw the same characters. And I wonder with some of this, because a lot of the research I do is about dreams, and a lot of your descriptions about seeing these things remind me of hypnagogia, almost like waking hypnagogia. And when you're going through that experience of hypnagogia, as you're falling off to sleep, you recognize that your thoughts create forms and then they materialize in front of you. And I think that these things happen in waking life as well. We've just tend to have lost that skill. And a lot of people have very powerful skills of visualization. And I think with areas of nature, especially when you think about things like a lake or an ocean or the sky, there's a kind of interference pattern that is grey background in order to manifest. It's almost like prima materia to manifest things to come out of. So I did have those ideas about how it's possible to like conjure up and your thoughts to create this reality. And in dreams, you see these things happening instantaneously. But I think that reality and the experiences in dreams and the experiences of thoughts, they're all kind of elements of spirit. And the further the further you come close to earth and reality, the denser those experiences are. So they take longer to filter through to that level. But it really reminded me of the hypnagogic experience, the the visualizing things. And one thing I was going to ask is, you said that when you saw the spaceship, you were with someone else. Did the other person see the spaceship, or were you the only one that saw the spaceship?
No, they also saw the
Oh,
spaceship, and they were equally sort of shocked, because I had already been very interested in UFOs at this point, but the whole experience, it was not like we were out looking for UFOs. I was with a girlfriend, and we were out talking and talking about relationships and things like that, and anything but weird, high strangeness stuff. And I started to see, and she started to see this as well along the lake. I should set up the scene a bit. We were on this pathway, a forested pathway that runs along a series of cliffs overlooking Lake Ontario. It's in a place called Ajax, which is just east of the city and east of a nuclear power plant, the same nuclear power plant where many years before I saw the big red glowing orb. As we were walking along and talking, I was getting closer to twilight, and I noticed what looked like lights playing across low on the horizon of the lake. And I started not feeling right in the head. I started thinking I was having a migraine coming on. And I told this to my girlfriend. I said, I'm not feeling so well. Maybe we should start walking back and towards our car. I think I'm getting a migraine might be coming on. And she was saying, I'm not really feeling all that well either. So maybe we should get going. And I pointed out and I said, maybe is that the sun like playing off sails on sailboats, or boys out in the lake, and it didn't seem to be that.
Was this in daylight then? This was daylight, yeah?
It was just getting to twilight.
Yes. Okay.
Getting just past that point after the sun has gone dipped below the horizon. So it was like these bright sparks of light, and it was like they were moving across the lake very quickly, but it was very strange, and I was still trying to rationalize it in my mind. So was she. And we started walking back towards the car along this pathway and up towards this cliff, and where the trees cleared out and you get up to this top of this cliff area, we were standing there, and I looked up. Something compelled me and her to look up, and then we saw these 3 red lights that looked at first like a triangle, and then a 4th light, so then a diamond, and then it's solidified. It looked like a metallic diamond-shaped object, not that far above us. I can't really give you a proper estimate, but it didn't seem like it was that high up. Like it wasn't like a passenger airplane. It was fairly low to the ground. And then these columns of red light came down and started playing off the water. And at this point, we were both in shock. I think I grabbed her arm. We were holding each other going, what the heck is this? And it looked very, very solid. It looked like if I could have thrown a rock at it, I would have expected to hear a metallic clunk. And then after maybe 30 seconds or a minute or so, it almost seemed to look like a kite bobbing in the wind. It just sort of slightly turned and vanished. And the feeling I had is that I wasn't seeing it anymore, but it was still occupying that space. And at that point, we started to panic, and we ran for the car. I think we were holding each other, running towards the car when, this was insane. So, and I got home, and I did a sketch, and I wrote everything down, and I was just like, oh my goodness, it was completely, again, reoriented me away from this skeptical road that I had started going down. And it was, no, there's something here. I can't deny this at all.
There's a lot of interesting points to be made here, isn't there? The first one I'm really intrigued about is the way in which you associate it with a migraine, which presumably means a similarity with a migraine aura state.
Yes.
And so I'm presuming that you're a classic migraineur then. So you have migraine aura, which, if you know about my writing in my book, Opening the Doors of Perception, I have a whole section on migraine and the way migraine seems to open the doors of perception slightly more than neurotypicals. But I'm also intrigued here about the theme of water. I remember many years ago, the first book I read on UFOs was way back around about 1965. And the particular theme of this book was a UFO sighting on Wannock Reservoir in upstate New York. And it seems to be that there's a linkage between UFOs and water and
Yes.
migraine attacks, and being a classic migrainer myself. And, you know, I've mentioned this case many times, my mother's experience with a UFO when she saw a UFO as a precursor to her own decline into Alzheimer's and Charles Bonnet syndrome. She had been a classic migrainer all her life. So there seems to be linkages here in terms of this opening the doors of perception phenomenon. But it's still extreme. So what do you think, in your research, have you come to any conclusions as to what is this linkage with water? Because in fact, there's a linkage with water, isn't there? Running water. We know Michael Persinger's work at Laurentian University in Toronto or in Ontario. You know, he was saying about water and the way the linkage with water and with psychic phenomenon. What's your thoughts?
There is a definite linkage. I don't know exactly why it is, but I don't think that it is a coincidence as well that water has been used for divination purposes going back to ancient Greece. So, and maybe even before that. There does seem to be a definite link between water, and I've always been drawn to water. I used to joke that I must have been a sulky in a previous life because I don't have previous life memories. But I'm constantly drawn to water, and I find that it is much easier for me to do shamanic practice or go into a trance state in the bathtub or with water, or if I go out into the lake. There's that pull. There's always that pull that's there. So I do feel there's a definite connection. I do want to say too, because we were talking before with Sarah about the dreams. One of the things I am doing in my research as well is exploring UFO experience as a waking dream. So I look at the symbolic content and the personal content that the UFO experience has, particularly high strangeness. The first UFO that I saw that I can definitely say was a UFO was that glowing red orb. And it wasn't until much later, maybe a decade after I had that experience, that I realized what I was seeing was like a giant stop sign in the sky. And when I correlate that to what was going on in my life at the time, there was a personal meaning in there for me as well.
This is the intriguing thing, isn't it? The link, the way in which it has personal meaning, as if that somehow we are expending out from ourselves our anticipations of external reality, consensual reality, and it's like a feedback loop where it feeds back to us our own expectations. You know, now we know with Carl Jung and a modern myth of flying saucers, a modern myth of things seen in the sky, there does seem to be this kind of feedback mechanism taking place. And of course, from this, I'd like to then move on, but keeping this theme going, so not losing the central theme here, but also other paranormal phenomena such as poltergeists, bilocation, these other things. These are all areas that you write about and you're interested in. So how can we weave these in to the overall Uber picture that we're developing here in terms of psi?
Well, I'm doing as well, aside from the UFO experimentation, I've recently started doing the same thing with Sasquatch, and I'm trying to lure Sasquatch here into northern Italy. There are stories of course, the wild man, and I think Beauty and the Beast ties into old folklore here, especially here in the Apennine Mountains. I've noticed that he's a little bit different than the one we experience in North America, but I'm trying to see if I can conjure something up here. I mean, that would be quite the magical feat, I think. So I do think that all of these things interweave. They tie into our culture, our folklore, where we are in life, and our belief systems. I feel that there is a strong co-creation. My friend Greg Bishop is working on a book on co-creation, and I do feel that also plays into it. If indeed there is another intelligence behind this, if it's more than us, or even if it is a greater human consciousness, then I think that we're co-creating, and it is filtered through our culture and our belief and the greater societal culture.
Yeah, because it's
kind of unifying theme in cultures around the world, and I think that in those myths and folklore, water is this source of memory, and this springs are portals to the underworld, and I think we still have so much within us. And with dreaming, one of the things I have noticed is that all pathways and all like water's just ever present in dreams. Like people always dream about things like tsunamis, rivers, streams, lakes. It's like it's our way of traveling in the inner world.
Yeah, because I think the link very much here to hypnagogic imagery and the way in which they see hypnagogic imagery and hypnopompic imagery is drawn, and as you pointed out before, lucid dreaming, out of body experiences, they all seem to share something. And it's sometimes you feel, don't you, that the clues are all there, it's just we're not putting the pieces together because we're not quite seeing the full picture in some way. Now, in terms of poltergeist activity, then, I mean, what have you been involved in poltergeist activity? Have you witnessed poltergeist activity, and indeed have you researched poltergeist activity?
I have, and I have experienced it, and I have researched it. And I do subscribe to some of the ideas of standard parapsychology, that there is there's tension there that's perhaps unexpressed, that is expressing itself as psychokinesis. But it's I do feel that it is also interconnected with UFOs, and that in part is what Eric was discussing in Illuminations, is how UFOs can be considered part of a haunted sky or a poltergeist phenomena, based on like we were examining UFO waves, so based on where a society was and tensions that were maybe not being expressed properly at the time that the UFOs occurred. One of the things that we discussed was the Belgian UFO wave, which was concurrent with a Soviet one at the very time that the Berlin Wall had come down and the Soviet Union was collapsing, and there was a lot of probably a lot of anxiety and fear and tension that wasn't being expressed properly as to what's going to happen now, and and all these people, these two opposing forces with their nuclear weapons. And so we noted that the main thrust of the UFO flap in the Western world was over NATO headquarters in Belgium. So if you look at what was happening in society at the time, and then consider how individuals and then the greater populations were experiencing things, then you correlate that to the UFOs in the sky, and it really seems as if they were a response to these stressors that were occurring. So that is the larger expression of UFOs versus the poltergeist activity that might occur to an individual and in their home and to the people around them.
A fascinating idea. And I notice as well that one of the things you're interested in is by location, because you'll be interested to know that our guest tomorrow on InCon is a mutual friend of Sarah and I's, called Kaz Coronel. And Kaz has many claims to fame, and one of her claims to fame is that she's a direct descendant of Benedict Spinoza, the Dutch philosopher. But the other thing is she's also a direct descendant of the very famous bilocating nun, who was living in a nunnery in Spain, but was also over in America converting the indigenous First Nations peoples over there. And we'll be discussing this with her tomorrow, and it'd be delightful if you could join in with us there in that discussion, which will be at a similar time or slightly earlier. But I'm now interested in your experiences of bilocations and apparitions as well. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
With bilocation and apparition, Yeah, these are experiments that I have been trying to do, is actually doing the bilocation and doing shamanic travel and seeing if I can provoke an experience of an apparition of myself with other people. So I've used various techniques. Again, usually water works really well with me, and submersion in water, to create that thought form of projecting out and appearing to the person that I'm hoping to appear to. And I did a series of experiments when I was still living in Canada, and the person that was the receiver, unfortunately, their children started becoming frightened because they were hearing what they thought was a ghost. And we thought that perhaps this was a sign that actually the bilocation had worked, but we stopped doing it because it was frightening her children, and they were thinking that there was somebody outside their window or out in their yard. And so at the time, what I didn't know what her home looked like, and so part of the trying to see if this was actually true, if this was working, as I was giving her remote viewing. I was describing the interior of her home, what she was wearing, that sort of thing, to try and add some evidence to what we were doing. And so that was one of them. Another time I sent a hug across what I call time and space to my now husband. Low point in this at time, and he described this to me, and I was like so excited because I was like, oh my gosh, he was saying, I had this experience, and I was like, it was me, I did it. And I told him the methodology behind it. I said I was doing this experiment to try and do this. So you've given me confirmation that it worked. So these are different things that I have been trying to do. I will say that what's frustrating is that if you use a specific method, it never seems to work out exactly as you want, and it never seems to work the same way twice. So the second book, which will be almost a magical cookbook as well, will give ideas to future people that want to do these types of experiments, and I will kind of open up my magical notebook, so to speak. But I do caution that I think there is that element of your own individual self that has to go into these things to work, along with spontaneity. So it will never work the exact same way for someone else, but I'm hoping that I will inspire other people, that they can do their own experimentation, whether it's for themselves or whether they're hoping to do a much grander experiment that might offer better evidence for other people. That will be the second book, will be really focused in on that.
Do you know, I love the reference to the hug being sent at a distance, because of course St. Valentine's Day isn't that absolutely perfect for today? Yeah. Which is really good. And I'm also really intrigued the way in which the children seem to pick up on it, and again comes back to my idea that somehow the doors of perception are open with the younger people, and they pick up these vibrations, and it's only as we program them to say that these things you're experiencing aren't real. Again referring to Halliwell's quasi-corporal companions, there clearly is something here that needs to be looked into in greater detail. Now, I know one of the things that I find so frustrating is that Sarah and I have now got used to doing InCon. And InCon we run for 2.5 for 3 hours sometimes. So we have all this expansive time. Whereas with Consciousness Hour, we literally only have an hour. And I suddenly look and I go, my God, we've been talking for 10 minutes. And suddenly we've run out of time. But what I would really like to do is for the final 10 or 15 minutes is to just discuss the area that is of great fascination to me, because together with two associates, as you know, we're doing research on the Philip case as well, in terms of applying my egregorial concept to the Philip experiment. So can you tell us a little bit about your angle, explain a little bit about the Philip experiment, but I'm very keen for you to explain the work you're doing on it, because there's a great deal of synergy between what Mariam and Sam and I are doing in terms of this as well. So fire away. And if people haven't heard of the Philip experiment, believe me, it was extraordinary.
Yes, it really was. I was very fortunate, and probably in a synchronistic way as well, that I just happened to be in a used bookshop trolling for paranormal themed books when I came across, I have it right beside me too, because I thought you'd want to talk about it, the Conjuring Philip.
Yeah.
I think I got it for like $5, I think quite a few years ago, and I read about it.
It's going to drive Marianne crazy, because I think it took her ages to actually get hold of that book for us, which I've got here now.
Oh, that's good.
It's so difficult to source a copy of it.
Yeah, so it was like, I was just, I guess it had to be that it was going to fall into my lap, and it was based. It was written by Iris Owen and Margaret Sparrow, based on a series of experiments where they wanted to prove, her husband, Dr. Owen, and their technical advisor, which was Joel Wheaton, whether or not you could create a ghost through seance and through a fictional story. So what they did is they got a group of various different people together that didn't know each other before, and they put them together in an experiment where they would do a seance. And while they were doing the seance, they created a fictional storyline. And the reason they did it as a fiction is because they wanted to say that they were definitely creating this ghost and not actually conjuring I guess a real ghost or a deceased person. So they created a story that had fictional elements, and that was historically inaccurate, like was not likely to have happened or resemble an actual person. And while they were doing this and creating and having creative play and creating this story, they were doing a seance. And I think the ultimate goal would have been to create a full-on apparition, as well as poltergeist phenomena. They were never able to create the apparition of their fictional ghost, but they were able to produce a number of poltergeist phenomena, including raps, table knocks. So they would ask their ghost questions, who they named Philip, and Philip would answer. And then they had other phenomena as well, such as the table that they were using would levitate. All of these things were filmed, by the way, and at one point they actually took the whole table and part of the group to Ohio State University, and there were physicists that were witness to this, and they were trying to measure the sound vibrations of the raps themselves. So this was all very, very fascinating and interesting work. And when I came across this, I was like enthralled by it. I thought, this is amazing, and I want to try and redo this. But I wanted to redo it as a UFO experiment. And at first I thought, okay, maybe we can create a gray alien as an apparition. And I really wanted to do it, but I started seeing that there was probably going to be some ethical problems with creating a gray alien. And I discussed this with Eric and a number of other people that were going to take part in this experiment. And we decided instead we would go with a UFO as opposed to the gray alien, simply because people have reported very real and traumatic experiences that they've suffered psychologically from, and had post-traumatic stress. So we didn't want to, even though we thought we could create an alien that maybe was friendly, that maybe crash landed here and needed our help, so giving us power and authority over this alien. I didn't want to take that risk with a group of people. So instead we worked on creating a UFO in a location. What we did is we had several locations picked out that were known UFO hotspots or had reports before, and then just one ringer that was just a random place. And then randomly we picked out a cohort, didn't know what the cohort was, and had that put away with another person. And for a year we spent time mostly meditating, talking, creative play to try and create this UFO. And we did have some interesting success with that, which I'm going to discuss more again in the next book, in regards to creating light phenomena in a location that there were reports from that we later found out. In fact, it was interesting. It was a Facebook confirmations by somebody at a location saying they've had the best UFO reports they've had in 10 years from this known hotspot. And then we later found out that happened to be the exact place that we had been envisioning sending UFOs and lights to. So, yeah, and there were a lot of synchronicities and fun with that. And I want to do it again. And keep doing these types of experiments. And I'm very interested in other groups that may be doing the same thing. But it was all based in Philip and the Conjuring Philip ideas of the Owens, which I owe a lot of thanks to for their pioneering work, because it really, really was pioneering in its time. Yeah,
it was absolutely extraordinary. And if anybody's interested in checking on YouTube, there's the videos of the when they took the table to the Canadian TV studio, and you actually see the table going up on two legs and moving around, and it is not possible. And you can see, because it is important to stress that these guys were not believers. They were not believers. But they were able to reproduce the most extraordinary phenomenon. And I'm in here. I'm resonating. I'm thinking, it's very similar to the skull experiment. And I'm hoping in the future to get probably somebody like Nick Kyle on the show, who was a witness to the skull experiment as well. We're running out of time now, so very quickly, I'm sure Sarah will totally agree, we need to get you back on Consciousness Income, where we can spend more time pursuing these, because we haven't had the chance to really follow up on a lot of these issues. So for now, we will have Susan back for a 2-hour mega show where you can get involved and you can ask Susan questions if Susan is interested in doing so. Okay, but for now, can you tell people your website and how they can get hold of your books, where they can find them and everything else?
My book in Italiano, for anyone who might want it in Italian, is The Witch La Strega, and then the English version is The Cosmic Witch. It's available on Amazon. It's available through my publisher. On my website has links to these, and from independent bookstores, they can order them in as well. And then there's my website, susandemeter.com. I'm always interested in hearing from people that have had similar experiences in high strangeness. I'm still collecting reports about the little people, and my heart's with that. So yeah, please contact me, and thank you so much for having me as a guest.
Oh, it's been delightful. It's been delightful, hasn't it, Sarah? It's been really good.
Yeah, thanks. It's nice to virtually meet you.
Thank you. It's nice to meet you too, and I look forward to future discussions.
No, absolutely, we must do that. Okay, everybody, thanks for joining us today. And again, for the people who are watching live, if you want to join tomorrow afternoon at 3 o'clock, we've got the amazing Kaz Coronel as well, where I'm sure we'll pick up on some of the themes we've been discussing today. So all I can say is thanks to everybody for this, and we'll see you all soon. Just to let you know as well that this will be placed up on my YouTube channel probably later tonight or tomorrow as well, so you can watch it there. Okay, thanks and everything, and have an enjoyable rest of St. Valentine's Day, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Ciao.